hostages. Now, going back to the top story, a last-minute deal agreed to by COP28 negotiators in Dubai. Dr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi joins us from the UAE. Dr. Chaturvedi is a fellow at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Now, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water is an independent, non-partisan, not-for-profit policy research institution devoted to research on all matters affecting the use, reuse and misuse of resources. It's based in India's capital, New Delhi. Dr. Chaturvedi, welcome to DD India News Hub. To begin with, could you put the text of the agreement in its proper context for our viewers? What does the agreement mean for the fight against climate change? And can it meet the target of keeping the Earth's temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Great. Very good evening. Thank you for having me on the show. Well, I think there are many different elements to the text. In negotiations, there are many parallel tracks on which negotiations happen. But the big message coming out is, first of all, for the first time in history, fossil fuels have been included in the text. Till now, it was only coal that was being targeted. The first time, all fossil fuels will be targeted. So that's the first thing. The second thing is always about that what is the intensity with which fossil fuels have been targeted. Right? So what's the intensity? The intensity is, you could say, kind of a bit of a letdown. So the expectation was fossil fuel. The demand was that fossil fuel should be phased out. That should be the agreement. Right now, the language only says that we should transition away from fossil fuels. So there is no phase out, there is no phase down. So you should just transition away. And the language around coal is much more tougher. That only means, well, that is acknowledged that fossil fuels are important. And it gives us some kind of breather for oil-producing nations. At the same time, the writing on the wall is very clear for all of them. It has been acknowledged fossil fuels is critical. Science was kind of reiterated many times during the whole discussion. So the importance of science, that for all fossil fuels should be covered, we have achieved that. So it's great. But in the next few COP, we do expect this kind of screws to be tightened around the fossil fuel. And that writing on the wall is also very clear. So this is kind of a big message. Right. Another big message about the loss and damage fund. This was a very long-standing demand of the developing South. That fund also got operationalized. It was already accepted last year in the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. Now some more like the operational or institutional arrangement around the fund has also been finalized. So that is also a kind of very positive development. These two are kind of big takeaways. The third is the global goal on adaptation. There is also a framework that has been kind of agreed upon. So these are some key takeaways, from this particular COP. And there are many announcements, especially India's announcement of green credits. That's kind of a very big announcement. If the world kind of, is able to harness the potential of green credits, it will be very beneficial on many different ways. So those are the things that I would say come to my mind in terms of the positives of what this COP has managed to achieve.
Right. Dr. Chaturvedi, you refer to the loss and damage fund, and that gives me a perfect segue to my next question to you. How does the COP28 actually propose to push nations to move away from oil, gas and coal? What does the deal say, for instance, about issues such as climate financing, loss and damage fund, green technologies? Because these are important issues for developing countries such as India.
Yeah, so finance is an extremely important issue because for the developing South, which wants to be ambitious, it's already being ambitious given its fiscal space, but if it wants to be more ambitious, then finance is the biggest lever, and that has always been lacking. And on finance front, I think there are a lot of announcements being made, right? So like you would hear 700 million for loss and damage fund and many of those kinds of things, which is great, which is a great start. That's how I'll put it.
Okay.
The language around finance is 4 words are used. The 4 words are very interesting. So it says new, additional, predictable, and replenishable finance. That's what we need. That's what, and that was not really agreed upon. The commitment that you kind of hear are all voluntary in nature. So they're great. But as I said, we need something that is very predictable. It is new, it is additional, and it is replenishable. We are still a bit far from that. So on the financial front, the demand of the developing South was kind of not really met, even though many voluntary commitments, which are voluntary means one time, So that's the challenge with voluntary. These are one-time commitments, which is great. It's a great welcome step. But we need to have something like a commitment that will be honored year after year. and
Right.
within the UN process. That did not happen at this COP, but let's hope for the best that hopefully it should happen in the next COP.
Fair enough. And talking about the global south, Dr. Chaturvedi, the small island states in particular are reported to have some reservations on the outcomes. For instance, the
Yes.
Alliance of Small Island States says the text has, quote unquote, a litany of loopholes. Now, what are their concerns, and do you think those concerns are legitimate?
Yes, yes. So the situation of the small island states, we should recognize it. These islands are expected to disappear if sea level rises. So it's an existential crisis for them. And of course, no wonder. Just imagine, your home is being submerged, and and you see this happening every day. And you know that in 30, 40, 50 years from now, effectively it will disappear. There will be no land there. That's the sea level rise that is already being witnessed by these states. So they are kind of very, very emotional about this issue, and very understandably so. Right? Very emotional. It's an existential crisis. So their demand was very clear. Their demand was that there should be a very strong language around fossil fuels. Their demand was that fossil fuels should be phased out, first of all, and their use should be peaked in this decade. Right? So peaking of fossil fuel energy in this decade with phase out by 2050, something like that. So they demanded a much more stronger language. What has kind of been agreed upon in the COP, as I said, that fossil fuels have been mentioned, but the language is very weak around it, right? So that, of course, that means the small island states are not at all very happy about this language. And the intervention after the text was adopted, the intervention by the small island state representative was exactly what you have talked about. They very clearly said there are many, many loopholes. They're very unhappy. The text makes it a notch more difficult for the world to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is extremely important because beyond that is when this whole existential threat starts emerging in a very big way for them. So yes, so that's what their response was. They were not very happy, and yeah, I would kind of agree with what they said. As I said initially, the fossil fuels mentioned is a great welcome step, but there is nothing to be celebrated about. It's a welcome step, but the celebration would have happened if the language would have been a lot more stronger around this whole fossil fuel, debate. Yeah.
Let's now talk a bit, if you will, about India. Do you think India has reasons to be satisfied with the COP28 outcomes?
Yes, I think India defended its red lines very well. So one big demand from the developed world was that coal power, there should be no new coal power installations. Now, of course, we are a rapidly developing economy, and development concerns are paramount. And that is always a challenge with the developing economy with a limited fiscal space. And that was a big demand from the developing world. It also came in one of the interim texts, but India was able to kind of defend that very well. So which is not there now anymore. So which is great. So that is a good thing basically. But always, there's always give and take in any of the negotiation process. So this is a thing that we gained very clearly.
Right.
We were able to defend. The other part, as I said, was finance. Finance was a very big demand for India. India has been positioning itself, rightly so, as a leader of the developing South, right? And the demand, a very big demand of the developing world has been about finance. On finance, we didn't really get a lot. The developing world did not really get a lot. Also to emphasize, this was the first global stocktake COP. And that's very important. Under the Paris Agreement, procedurally, the global stocktake is an official process that kind of collectively assesses the progress of the world on three different aspects. The first is mitigation, second is adaptation, the third is means of implementation. That includes finance. So three things where we have to take stock, whether we are progressing well or not. And then the whole point of taking stock is not just like a report. The point of stock taking exercise is how can we deliver more? How can we ratchet up our ambition? So that's the whole point of this whole stock take process, which simply means the ambition on both like fossil, the ambition on finance, that should have been a lot more. That kind of didn't end up happening on the financial part. We required a lot more.
Right.
Progress have been made, no doubt about it. But that whole ambition part of the whole deal, that has not materialized at this global stocktake COP.
All right, on that note, may I thank you, Dr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Right, moving on, the 47th International Kolkata Book Fair has announced the United Kingdom as its theme country for 2024 in collaboration with the British Council and the Publishers and Booksellers Guild. The